One, good to see you on this lovely Wednesday. That we're at Wednesday, yes. Hope everyone is doing well. So we are back diving into the exciting world of city finances, timely, of course, as we're going through our budget season here at the city. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for the lovely slides that Jordan's prepared for us today. I do have a little bit of difficulty seeing you all, so Jordan will be on the lookout if anyone's raising their hand or posing questions as we go along. And we do have some follow-up from last class too. So let's see if I can do this part at least. Okay. So you should be seeing our welcome to the class rules. Is that, we're thumbs up. Okay, cool. So if you can have your video on, that would be great. We like to see faces instead of black screens, so you're helping us out. Feel free to put your name and your neighborhood in the chat so you can connect with your fellow OLLIers. I say that right? And then mic off until we're asking questions. And then if you have some difficulties, go ahead and give us the call and we can work through that. Oh, not advancing. Yes, advancing. All right. So just make sure we're all in the same right place. Show me the money, finances of local government. That's what we're doing today. Class 2, old pros at this. So we had some questions from last session that we're going to kick off and start with. So one of those is, how is the budget prioritized? So the budget, as I'm sure you all have reviewed and read every budget document we have on the website going back 20 years, a lot of information. So how do we prioritize all of that? So our main focus is the services, the essential services that we provide that are required by law or regulation. So a lot of what we do, we're required to do, and it's set standards provided either by state law or federal law. So we're thinking about water or electricity, wastewater. We're not just making up our own willy-nilly rules about the quality of water we're going to serve or how we're going to serve it. It's often dictated by laws. The other thing we look at are community and council priorities. So you may have all participated a few years back in the town hall where we did some dot voting. We got some feedback from the community on what their priorities were and carried those through and how we fund the programs and services we provide. So the ones that rose to the top during that process was wildfire and public safety, affordability for the city, and economic development. Those are some of our top findings from that activity with the community. Just as a side note, we are going to do a large strategic planning process coming up summer, fall timeframe of this year, which will be very similar in nature, of a more in-depth look at putting together a long-term plan for the city for the next 10 or 15 years of what the community priorities are and where we're going. And that feedback will again help us as we move forward through our funding cycles every biennium to put resources towards the community's priorities. Other follow-up, what were the transfers out of the general fund? So you might remember this lovely graphic that Jordan put together for us, kind of what's going on in our general fund. And the gray, I think, was the transfers out. So we touched on this a bit last time. So with our general fund, finances aren't static. So sometimes we develop new funds or change the way we do our accounting principles with our financials. So our general fund is our big fund. We used to have a separate general fund just for parks. So we would move money kind of into that fund. Now today, the parks fund is dissolved and all of that money is just in the general fund and appropriated at the department level. We move money out of the general fund into reserves. We have a reserve fund that we use to hold revenue in the case of emergencies. So this is fairly new to us, having this funded, and it's kind of a result as what we saw happen after the Alameda fire, is having some sort of large scale emergency and having additional funds to tap into, mostly when we're thinking about that time period when the disaster happens to when we're having, state or federal aid coming down. We have funds to tap into to be able to help us through some sort of emergency if we need to. We receive money into the general fund for our housing trust fund, marijuana revenue, and we put that money into a specific fund so it can only be used in specific ways dictated by council. And then we have a specific fund for insurance. So we take money out of the general fund and put that together in the insurance fund, and that's how we pay for both our healthcare as well as our building insurance. And then you'll see similar kind of parks fund and tourism fund. So we've taken our tourism dollars, our TOT. I think we talked about this last time. We have a 10% lodging tax that we collect for tourism purposes. We put that in a specific fund to hold that. And then we can only appropriate money out of that to spend on tourism related things. Jordan, did you want to add anything with that one? Transfers out? No. So not as exciting as one would hope, I guess. Just kind of regular business. Another question from last class, what does our tourism data look like? And, quite honestly, Jordan is our latest and greatest tourism expert, so I'm going to have her talk about this, if you don't mind, Jordan.
Yeah. So I emailed just before this class a full report to you all that Travel Ashland gave us that shows all the data we're looking at for our tourism dollars, but I wanted to highlight these two. And full confession, for review, the file size was too large to get that report to you all. So I'm going to figure out how to get it on our website and send you the link for those four of you that don't have it in your inbox. What I like to keep my eye on when it comes to looking at our tourism numbers is the number of visitor days. So people that are down here visiting, whether they're staying overnight or not. And then occupancy data, which is the overnight data that we can track to know how many folks are staying in our hotels or in our Airbnbs and vacation rentals. So things that I want to point out, you all can't see my mouse, I'm assuming. So, if you look at the monthly visitor days, what I want you to notice that blue bar in those first 6 months, we are having lower visitor volume than we experienced during the pandemic. We're waiting on the data updates for the last 6 months of last year to better understand if that continued. The really good news is we're seeing very high ticket sales this year in OSF. So I do expect 2025 to look better than 2024. Then if you pop over to the other graph with all that spaghetti on it, we're seeing the same thing in our occupancy trends as we are seeing in our visitor days, where 2023 was a much lower year than all of our previous tourism years. Not yet updated with 2024, but once again, we're hoping 2025 comes back stronger. But we're averaging roughly 60% occupancy, but the really big thing to note is look at when our tourism happens. It's almost entirely in the summer months. So the city's focus is how do we help increase tourism in all the other months of the year to help sustain our local businesses year round, since we're no longer getting that giant push in the summer that gets a lot of cash on hand to last the winter.
Great.
Yeah, always happy to talk offline about tourism.
Thank you.
And Sabrina, before we jump into today's meet, there was a question that popped up in chat that I think might be good to have a discussion before we jump into the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, let's do it. Can't see it. Hold on.
And I'll go ahead and read it out loud so it's on our recording as well for when we post this. What will the coming recession do to the city's budget? Or how do we estimate the effects of what's going on at the federal level on the city's budget?
Yeah, great and timely question. So, one of the things we look at when we're looking at a budget, for example, at the federal level is going to affect is, the city's been very successful getting grant dollars in the past, whether that's CDBG funds that we push through to nonprofit partners or infrastructure grants that we've received. We are no longer budgeting as if we are going to receive grant funding. So typically grant funding was, fairly stable. We had a fairly good estimation on whether or not we would receive that grant funding. Given kind of the uncertainty around funding coming down from federal agencies, we're not going to budget as if we're going to receive grants. That doesn't mean we will stop pursuing grants. We just no longer have the confidence in that we will be receiving them. So that is one way. The other thing we're looking at is making sure that we're having a no growth budget this year. So as Jordan just explained, tourism is a big key to our economy. Tourism brings in dollars in both TOT taxes as well as food and beverage. So projections are low around revenue. We don't have any services that we provide the community that are reliant on federal or state dollars necessarily. And so that is a strong position for us to be in, unlike, for example, the school district or SOU that often budget with the idea that they're going to get federal pass-through funds. We're not in the same position. But what we are seeing is some just general compression around our general fund, as we talked about before, where our expenditures are exceeding our revenues. And in part, we're estimating that we will see inflation, cost of living increases, and increases to our materials and services. So we buy all kinds of things here at the city, vehicles to pool chemicals, and all of those are potentially going to have an impact on their price and be more expensive for us to get, just as it would be for individuals. And so as we're budgeting, we are keeping an eye on that and making sure that we have the proper contingency dollars in our budget. So we do appropriate specific kind of pool of money for each fund, that if something unusual comes about, we have those funds to be able to tap into and expend. So for example, this biennium, we had a lot of fire overtime due to the paid leave program the state implemented. And so we're tapping in to that contingency to cover that. So that is kind of a nice safety net for the uncertainty that comes about from having to project a multi-year budget. We're also ensuring that we have good ending fund balances for all of our funds, which puts us in a strong financial position moving forward into the future so that we can have good credit rating. For example, if we do have large infrastructure projects we need to tackle, that we have operating dollars, kind of think about it as like the city's savings account for each of these funds. So a lot of times in the enterprises, they'll have large ending fund balances because we've been saving up over multiple years to be able to do a capital project. So that's true with all of our funds. We want a strong ending fund balance to ensure that we always have enough money if for uncertainty, if there's a recession, if we don't see the same level of state shared revenue, for example. So we have a lot of things that we consider. I would state that the uncertainty at the federal level and the potential around tariffs and for a recession are very concerning to the city, because we want to make sure that we're in a strong financial position moving forward and that we have the resources that we need to be able to provide the essential services to the community. So this round of budgeting has an added layer of uncertainty that I personally am not super fond of, because we want to do the best that we can to project into the future and make sure that we can provide the services moving forward. So that's how that will impact us. Jordan, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, on top of what Sabrina's saying around, it's always hard to budget with uncertainty. You know, what we're starting to see is real impacts on the ground where a lot of services that our community receives that's not provided by the city is also losing funding. I don't know if you all saw the article this morning, you know, Head Start in Ashland, that program has been temporarily stopped since they haven't received any federal grants. So one thing that the cities are aware of and keeping an eye on is how are people's lives being impacted? And A, how can we stabilize our services, but help disseminate information to help people make decisions around their lives. So volatility is tough for everybody, from city governments down to individuals, trying to figure out what they're doing. And we're trying to stay as nimble as we can on our toes as information changes.
Thanks, Jordan. All right, what the heck are we talking about today? We're going to talk about revenue streams and major expenses. So congratulations, you made it to class number 2. Here we go. So let's talk about revenue. So this is the money in, is the way I would think about it. So money comes in, services go out. So this is the money in. So let's start with what you pay for city services. So We have a couple of examples here where you will see what you are paying for. Um, Now, the biggest way that you pay for city services is through property tax and your utility bill. So Jordan's put an example on here for both of us. So over here you see a tax statement. And I don't know how often you look at your tax statement or if you have, but I always think it's kind of interesting to know the layers of service that are going on that you're paying for. So, for example, you have our education district, right? So that's the school district. That's Rogue Community College. And then we have any sort of bonding that the school district has done that we're paying for. So all the work on their building, for example. You have the county, vector control, my personal favorite. No one likes mosquitoes. RVTD, so the local transportation district, soil and water conservation, right? So a lot of layers of government going on your tax bill. And then you have your utility bill, which you might be a little more familiar with since we send that out once a month. So that is where you're paying for your utilities, but also some of the fees that go towards general services. I will say, what is unique about Ashland is all of your utilities are on one bill. So when I moved here several years ago from Colorado, I would get a separate electric bill, a separate water bill, a separate um, telecom bill. So everything was parsed out. Here at the city, everything is together in one bill. So that is a little bit unique. So when we're looking at your property tax bill, if you go to general government, you'll see the city of Ashland there. So we're at the bottom, kind of in the middle. So you have your education, your other bonds. Those are usually for large infrastructure projects. In the middle, we have the government layers, right? So city of Ashland, 1,682, right? Versus Jackson County, 788, library district, right? So if you look at every $100 you pay, roughly 27 goes towards the city, 34 goes towards the schools, 19 towards the county, 15 goes towards facility bonds. So that's what I'm talking about, those large infrastructure projects. And $5 go towards the community college and ESD, right? So that makes sense. You reside in the municipalities. So the majority of your services are coming from the city. So if you were a resident of Talent, for example, you would see Fire District 5 as a line on your property tax bill, as they have a fire district that's funded through property tax there. So depending on where you reside and what level of layers of government your home resides within, your tax bill may look a little different.
Sabrina, I'm going to jump in because there's a quick question around what is ESD? And ESD is the Education Service District. In Oregon, the state is broken up into, I believe, 11 different education service districts, and they provide support to the local schools. So whether that's extra special ed programs, if that's teacher training, etc., that is all via the regional ESD. So our ESD covers Ashland, Phoenix Talent School District, Medford School District, and a couple of the other smaller school districts around us.
Hello.
Thanks, Jordan. All right, so back to our back of the envelope estimate here on your tax bill. $27 goes towards the city of Ashland for every $100 you pay. About 15 and a half of that goes to public safety, so police and fire. Almost 7 to parks. 4 goes to streets and general government, and 19 cents to long-term debt. As a city, we don't have a lot of debt in our general fund. So that means we haven't done any big infrastructure projects for a long time. And I think the debt service we do have are for parks facilities. Jordan, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that correct? Yeah. So, all right. So that was your property tax bill. So those come twice a year? That feels right. All right, Jordan.
Most folks pay them through your escrow account along with your mortgage. The city receives our share from the county every quarter.
Every quarter. Okay. Just trying to think when I get it in the mail and it says, don't pay this if you have a mortgage. And then I get a little nervous, but yes.
I'm hoping you only get it once a year.
Okay, once a
More
year.
than once.
One
Double
and
check.
done. One and done with the property tax bill. All right. Um, and just as a side note, if you own your home outright, then you have to pay the property tax. Don't forget to do that. That would be bad. Okay. Um,
Hi.
all right, utility bill. So this is the other way that you support city services. So we have our utilities. So those highlighted in yellow, those are the enterprises that we talked about. So for your electric wattage that you use, your kilowatt hours, you're paying for that. And you're paying for both the base rate, which is what it costs to provide the service. So that's the overhead power lines, the power poles, the employees, the linemen, et cetera, and then what you're using, right? So that's what goes into utility charges. And then for general services, we have a couple of other fees. So we have the public safety fee, AFR, which is actually a wildfire fee, street user fee, and our electric user tax. So you may have heard some conversation about raising fees with city council, and we'll take that up again on Tuesday. So to maintain the level of service for the city, we need to increase these fees to ensure we can continue to provide the level of ambulance service that we provide, as well as the wildfire mitigation that we're looking to provide, given that that's our number one threat and the number one concern of the community. Our electric users tax isn't really a tax. That name is kind of confusing, and I think we need to change it. We might look to do that. It goes back quite a ways, but it is just kind of a general service fee to the general fund. So it funds the general fund. It's not going towards our electric utility, but that funds all of the general fund services. So, parks, police, fire, admin, finance, all of that out of that. So those are kind of the two ways that revenue comes in for the general fund: property tax and fees. Oh, all right. Major revenue streams. So we just talked about taxes and fees. You'll see user taxes, property taxes, other ways we get revenue into the general fund and the street fund. So I mentioned grants earlier. So often we were able to receive grants from state or federal grant opportunities to be able to do large infrastructure projects. Charges for services. So that is when for example, you take a recreation program and they charge you a fee for that program. We also are vigilant in investing the money that we do have to ensure that we're getting a good rate of return to be able to reinvest that into city services. And did I miss any of them? I think that's about it. And then on the flip side, for our utilities or enterprises, so electric, water, wastewater, et cetera, the majority of revenue coming in from that are charges for service. And so that are the electric, water rates, et cetera, that the utility users are charged to be able to use that utility. We often have been able to receive grants. For example, we received a grant for the new water treatment plant. So we do look for grants for infrastructure projects for our enterprises as well. And then we do invest funds for the enterprises and get returns on that as well. So those are the major enterprise. So the more colorful one is the general fund. We're trying to get revenue from multiple places. The business type activities, those are our enterprise utilities that are operated more as a business, charge for service. All right, so let's talk about money out. We talked about money in, now we're talking about money out. So I think I mentioned last time, the biggest expense at the city is for personnel when it comes to operation. So 98% of what we spend around our utilities are cost of providing the service, right? So we have some depreciation going on with our infrastructure, but our business enterprises are the big money makers and the big money expenders in terms of cost of services. So as you can see, electric, water, wastewater, AFN, and stormwater. Those are all of our enterprises. So a large part of the city's budget is encompassed within those enterprises. Uh, yeah, all right. General fund. So to go back to this, so electric in its own fund, water in its own fund, wastewater in its own fund. So they get their own fund. So they don't have to share. They're all by themselves. General fund. We all have to share in the general fund. So one pot of money. So you have multiple programs in the general fund. So here, Jordan's broken it down by kind of the percentage of the pie that each department utilizes to be able to provide that service. So fire and rescue, definitely our number one, followed by police and then parks and rec. That makes sense. They're the ones who provide kind of service throughout the community on a regular basis. And then some of our more internal or smaller departments take up less of the pie. And then much like the enterprises, our biggest expense on the general fund side is also people, right? I have to have people to provide the service. They are our biggest expense. And then we need the materials and services to be able to provide that. And then we do sometimes have some larger scale projects that we do around facilities, for example, in our general fund. So that's what's going on in terms of money going out. So when we're spending money at the city, it's either for people, materials, or for big infrastructure projects. That's it for the most part. Ashland and Fire, as one of our biggest general fund expenditures, 70% of their budget goes towards operations, which that is all of our firefighters that we have on staff. The rest of the small folks make up our medical transport, fire and life safety, which is our CERT volunteers, our RAP program, our wildfire division, and then the administration of that. And again, as I mentioned before, people are our big expense here at the city. And I think we had that one called out because last time we had a specific question about fire and rescue. So I'm not picking on them, just relaying that information. So revenue versus expense, right? So we talked about, balancing a budget, what we see going on. So when we're looking at government activities, we always want to make sure that the revenue coming in matches the expenditures going out. So general government, that's if you put everything together, right? But when you break down public safety, parks and rec, highway, streets, it's often more expensive to provide those services than what we make off of direct charges or what we for example, with emergency transport, we get reimbursed for that, but we do have to write off a lot of debt for that as we don't get fully reimbursed for the cost of transport. Jordan, did you want to chime?
Yeah, I just want to say, so what this graph is showing is how much is spent within each program versus how much each program makes in their various fees. So as you look at Parks and Recreation, you see the orange bar. That is from when you pay to take a dance class or a watercolor class or go ice skating at the ice skating rink. That's their program revenues. All of this is offset because as someone brought up last time that we need to have balanced budgets through our property taxes and through all of those other general revenue categories that we've talked about to help subsidize those programs that we're providing. So as you see, one of the reasons that we collect a public safety and wildfire bill on your utility bill is to help make up that giant gap that we see between the revenue that our fire department brings in versus the cost of actually running the fire department. So I want to emphasize that revenue is not all of our revenue, but just our revenue that's specific coming from those programs.
Thanks, Jordan. Versus our business type activities, the expense versus the revenue of providing water, electric, wastewater, etc. I think something to note about both the general fund and our utilities is to do large infrastructure projects. We often need to bring in more revenue than we would expend in a single year. and save that revenue over multiple years to build up enough of a fund balance to be able to execute on large scale projects. So oftentimes when you hear a financial report of the city around a particular enterprise, they'll have what appears to be a large fund balance until they put in the new transfer station, for example. And then the scale of the projects being multiple millions of dollars quickly draws that fund back down. So that is kind of the ebb and flow of the finances within our utilities often. All right. Nailed it. Halfway through, halfway for questions. All right, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you guys better. Maybe. Yes. All right. So what questions do you all have for Jordan and I?
I want to touch on going back to Benji's question earlier. I'm going to jump in. You guys had asked the question around, how is what's happening at the federal level impacting city services? A takeaway that I hope you guys take from today is that our city services are largely and primarily locally funded, where federal grants are impacting us is on our large scale projects. So the one very active federal grant that we have right now is for wildfire resiliency. It's a grant to help certain property owners make their properties less fire hazardous, for a roundabout way of saying safer. And we don't know. We don't know. We have not heard back from federal government. We don't know if we'll continue to get those grant funds or not. So we'll keep an eye on it. And then, of course, some grant programs we were applying to for a water treatment plant look no longer available. But we will continue to keep our ears open. So Ashland's very lucky where our operations aren't dependent on federal money. But it will impact our ability to do large scale projects in the near term.
Yeah, and I will say, we've had an eye on this for a while now. And I think, part of what the city is doing is controlling what we can control, which is we can always be ready when the opportunity presents itself. If any of these grant programs come back online, that we are ready to go after them again. Yeah.
We do have a question in chat from Dave. Next to the last slide, the one that was showing the revenue versus the expense, general government revenue was about 20 million. Can you explain? And yes, and so what you see under that general government, a lot of that is our community development department. So when you submit plans to the city, we charge you fees to review those plans and fees around actually building in Ashland. So a lot of that revenue in that bar is from those fees. It's also, we get revenue from all of the other funds for providing administration services. So when the water department is using our utility billing staff, they pay for those services. So roughly 5 million is for those services. Roughly 3 million is for kind of that community development. And if you all keep asking more questions, I will pull up all the other details to make sure I'm giving you accurate information around where that 20 million comes from.
So part of that, we've had several $1 million worth of grant money come in to the general fund as well. And that would be seen as general fund revenue for those years that funding pertains to. Sandy?
I have a comment, or I guess a question related to the effects on the Ashland budget of national circumstances. And I appreciate what you were saying, like with grants and that kind of thing, but it could also have an effect on revenue from a standpoint of tourism and business and lots of other things, how people are going to be affected. So it makes it even more volatile than, than what you might, I'm sure you're thinking of these things, but it really has very wide-reaching effects.
Yes. Yes, I think, part of our budget process is we have to do projections of what we think we will see around that kind of activity. And so we're, being very conservative in our estimation, because, I think past history has demonstrated when there's a lot of volatility going on, people tend to not travel as much. They tend to kind of batten down the hatches and not expend, income in ways that they maybe would during less volatile times. And so taking all of that into consideration, as well as being careful, and monitoring as we work through and expend funds the next biennium, that we will monitor our revenue and adjust accordingly, as we go along, knowing that, we're being, my general tagline with this budget is I'd rather be ultra conservative and wrong, than not as conservative and wrong the other way. So I'd rather, budget that we are going to have dramatic impacts and not see that revenue come in, and then have more revenue come in and be able to appropriate it and do more things, than overextend ourselves now and have to walk it back pending kind of, the impact that may potentially come about. So, that's been our methodology here at the city in terms of budgeting. We're also trying to catch up with the fact that we have not raised rates or fees since 2018, 2019, with an eye towards, there was COVID, there was just, trying to minimize impacts. But we need to balance the demand for the service and the cost of providing that service, with the revenue that's coming in and the revenue we need around our utilities. And so all of that is a very tough discussion because it's happening all at once due to kind of delaying that discussion for multiple years at this point. So we're having bigger jumps, instead of kind of systematic, smaller increases over time. So moving forward, the goal is to build in automatic, increases of minimal amount, so that we don't have to have large increases all at once moving forward. So Lisa asks, what happens to the new water treatment plant? So that is still moving forward. So, we have the funding program that we're moving forward as outlined prior through the WIFIA program. We had been, working for multiple years now towards getting a building resiliency infrastructure, something with the letter C grant, the BRIC grant, which was through FEMA, which as of 4 days ago, that program was, shut down, I believe. I don't know if it's going to be brought back online. So the hope was, and the hope still is, and we will continue to look for grant opportunities around large infrastructure projects, because the more we can get with grant funding, the less we have to adjust rates, in terms of being able to provide that infrastructure and that service moving forward. I will say that with the funding program for the water treatment plant and the fact that we can finance it for such a long time, for 35 years, the rate impacts we're seeing are more from what I spoke about earlier with not raising rates, since 2019, 2018, and having to make that up given the increase in operational costs, with a small impact on rates coming from the water treatment plant due to the long-term horizon of the financing. So still moving forward, though I would love it to be covered by grants, and we will continue to pursue that. There's just a lot of uncertainty around that right now.
So I'm going to jump in with just, now I can fully answer the question around where's that 20 million coming from under general government. So that's coming from that electric users tax that you have on your utility bill that goes into the administrative bucket, franchise fees, our transient lodging tax, as I said, those administration services, those internal charges, some grants, planning and building fees, and then interest on all of our investments, etc. Turns out general government is the catch-all, for everything that's not assigned to a program.
It really is.
So we have another question from Dave. So compared to other cities that are about the same size as Ashland, what stands out as more costly for Ashland? Is it the difference in the cost of staffing here?
Yeah, I think what stands out with Ashland and kind of looking at, speaking about fire, police and parks in general as our three biggest general fund departments that are the most costly. When we look at parks, for example, we have 811 acres of parkland. The city for a long time has been supportive of being kind of a very shining gem in terms of having good recreational amenities. So same with our fire and EMS. We have a fully staffed fire department. We have now 4 dedicated teams of EMS to serve the community versus, other jurisdictions that may reside within a fire district to not have a municipal EMS team. So I think really what stands out for Ashland is just our level of service that we provide the community. But that level of service, as Dave rightly said, it comes with a cost, right? And so, part of the public safety fee that's being raised is to keep on that single role program, which is our ambulance service, given the volume of calls we get for service for the ambulance within our jurisdiction. So I think, when I look at talent, they have almost a $9 parks fee and 34 acres of parks, right? We haven't had a parks fee for a long time, and we have, 53 miles of trails, 811 acres of parks. So I think it's just, we provide and we want to provide, and the community wants a lot of service. So how do we best balance that level of service with what the community is wanting and can afford?
And Sabrina, I'll jump in more bluntly. Admittedly, it's our fire department. Most cities our size do not have their own municipal fire. Central Point is the closest city our size. I like to compare ourselves to McMinnville. They used to have a fire department, but they switched to a regional fire. Largely because it's very, very expensive to have our own fire department, but we've chosen to have it here in Ashland because we really want to prioritize response times and service for our community.
But to Jordan's point, if we belong to a fire district, for example, it would be much cheaper for the general fund. But that would change the level of service. Yeah.
I have a question regarding economic development, because our future, it seems to me, relies on diversifying our economy, diversifying our demographics so that we have less percentage of the population being retired. I say that as somebody who's semi-retired and looking forward to retirement in Ashland. But so I understand that that's not specifically part of the budgeting process, but it has to be part of the city planning process. So what is in the works for diversifying the economy, getting small manufacturing, small workshops, artisans, that kind of thing to come here, because we cannot guarantee our ability to rely on tourism given the nature of climate change and forest fires. People aren't come here when they can't breathe in the city.
Yeah, absolutely. So my role here at the city was created in large part to focus on diversifying our local economy.
And what are you doing?
Yeah, so I've been in my role for 4 months now. And so far, what I'm trying to do is build really strong partnerships, because the biggest barrier for us to attract year-round living wage jobs is the cost that it is to live in Ashland. We need to have a workforce to be able to be the employees for those employers that come into town for example, for light manufacturing, etc. So a big part of the coming years is going to be figuring out how we can help support more workforce housing. Workforce being the kind of income range like teachers, nurses, folks that are working in, Blue Marble, which is the scientific toy company on the street, etc. That'll need to be a big focus. At the same time that we are actually prospecting the pole businesses here. So how can we go out and sell ourselves so that folks want to come to Ashland? Because we are absolutely fabulous. We're all living here for a reason. I'm not planning on moving anytime soon. So our big efforts over this next biennium are going to be that workforce housing and that prospecting for businesses.
And I think just as a follow-on, we do have a current economic opportunities analysis going on with consultants to help us identify a couple of things. One being, where are the lands that we should be developing and what does that development look like? And what are actionable next steps that the city can take versus what other areas should be more left to potential partners. So that is, I just had an interview for that right before this class. So that's currently underway and will be finalized, I think, early summer, late spring. And that will be available to the public as well. And from that report, I'm sure we'll be looking to go from there in terms of actions the city can continue to take in addition to what Jordan's laid out here.
So what actions are you thinking about now? Are you thinking about using city land as a land bank? Or how's the city gonna be participating in getting new housing?
Yeah, so there is, thoughts to how do we, if we're divesting of the city property, for example, can we RFP that for housing and work with developers that way? We don't own that much land that we can bring in a lot of potential workforce housing. So, Hargadine Garage is one area. We own a property over on Clay Street, North Mountain, et cetera. So looking at moving those properties and then working with partners on how we provide incentives or opportunities for us to assist with that. If we were looking to acquire land and hold it for a land bank, it's a very slow and long process. So I think we're open to other ideas as well. And that's, I think, something that EOA, the Economic Opportunities Analysis, can help us with.
Okay.
Yeah, the best thing we can do to help support more housing or more businesses is to either make land cheaper or make the cost of building cheaper. And so typically the strategies the city will take will align with one of those areas.
I would caution against making development cheaper because that means that fewer development fees are assessed and we don't seem to get the right infrastructure in at the time that development goes in and things that cost more money down the road. So
Yeah.
I would caution against that side of the picture that you're painting.
No, absolutely.
There is, sorry, go ahead, Jordan.
No, Lisa, absolutely. Everything has domino effects, and it's, the community deciding where we're willing to help encourage development to happen.
Mm-hmm.
There was some movement at the state level on wanting to waive SDC fees for certain projects, and that for that reason that you just mentioned, Lisa, that's not super attractive because that sets up for kind of a long-term financial issue in term around infrastructure, et cetera. So yeah, definitely looking to strike the right balance of being attractive, but ensuring long-term sustainability as well.
In terms of housing, what's the thinking in terms of apartment buildings and smaller units versus the larger units and the mix of rentals versus owned properties? Because one of the things to make to bring people in with an economy is the need for rental housing. In fact, most people for large parts of their life do better with rental housing than with investing everything in their own private home.
Yeah. Lisa might be able to answer that from the planning commission, but I'll touch on a few things and she can correct me if I'm wrong. So our planning department just released some free ADU plans. So we have a couple of things going on to try to make housing more affordable or think outside the box of like traditional housing. So one of that is releasing free ADU plans for those who are looking to add an accessory dwelling on their property and kind of reducing the barriers around that. The other thing that's going on is our climate friendly initiative actions, which allows for greater density and higher building. I didn't say that right. Multi-story building, which we're pretty maxed out here at 2 stories, so allowing that to go up to 5 stories in certain areas of the community. So I think those are two important changes we have. The city doesn't really have anything right now in terms of controlling what is rental versus what is homeowner. We do have some control over our affordable housing units that are annexed in terms of keeping prices low there. But we are a bit limited in terms of, stating this must be a rental versus not. But that's something we can definitely explore. Lisa, how did I do?
Very good.
Thank you.
Well, the thing that I would add is the school district is trying to address this issue as well through the Sunstone project, and that's underway right now. So I think this space is being looked at by multiple entities.
Yeah. And just so you all know, Lisa Werner is our planning commission chair. So she is a valuable asset here at the city and helping us make decisions around land planning, which is why I'm deferring to her. So don't be nervous. I won't just like, Benji, you're in charge of this topic. I won't do that. She's actually an expert. So yeah.
So is the Sunstone project the one that's on North Mountain across from the school? The big field there on North Mountain in Maine, I think it.
Yes, yes, that's the location they're looking at.
Yeah.
We have Elaine's hand up and then a couple questions in chat that I want to make sure we can get to.
Okay, thinking about increasing tourism. I used to live in Sacramento, and the only way to get here, you can't fly direct Sacramento to Medford. There are no flights. I don't know, have you thought about working with a partner in the Sacramento area or Reading or both to see about renting buses and organizing tourists to come here, like maybe for the Oregon Shakespeare Festival or maybe for the Independent Film Festival or something like that, to bring more tourists in and make it easy for them to get here. Provide the transportation and arrange with a hotel and all that, because it's hard to get. There's no Amtrak, and I don't think there's any buses, right? No Greyhound or anything like that that comes here. So that's a thought.
Good
I'm a
idea.
big for Elaine. I think it's a great one.
Yeah. All right. Plans to rethink, reconsider levels of service in the city. For example, rethinking having a park within a quarter mile of houses and rethinking fire level of service. Yes, is the short answer, right? So as we have this conversation about raising fees versus level of service, really the conversation is about the level of service for the community. So for example, the Parks Commission set that goal of parks, and I think there is a desire to recognize that talking about tourism and quality of life here, parks play an essential role in that. And at what level of service is it acceptable to have our parks department on? Same for fire. So we're in the process of collecting data of other jurisdictions. So what's the acceptable rate? So there's national standards for how quickly we can respond to things. There are not national standards around not being able to respond to 911 calls for EMS, for example. So what's an appropriate rate? And what I mean by that is you call 911 and no one comes, right? So that's not really a great discussion. But there is kind of creep around the demand for service. And are we able to meet that, or what should the goal be in terms of meeting that? So in terms of fire service, for example, we are looking at that as well as the staffing model to figure out how we move forward. Jordan, did you have anything you want to add to that one? All right. School district enrollment expected to impact the budget. It's an interesting one. Jordan, do you want to?
my thoughts on that.
Yeah.
No, so just so you all, for those that don't know, Ashland School District does have projected declining enrollment. So they've had that projection and that reality really since 2018. They've seen a decline and they had a huge cliff occur during COVID. So that decline's happening faster than they expected. How does that impact the city budget? The truth is it doesn't impact the city's budget very much. The city's budget primarily comes in from people living in our houses and paying their utility bills. And so even as families move out of our city and into a different district, people are still buying Ashland houses and wanting to live in Ashland. So the city budget is not largely impacted. Where it does impact us is economic development. And what is the economic fabric of our community? Because declining enrollment is also a sign that working families are potentially leaving our community. And so that goes back to the workforce housing conversation, is how can we bring those folks who are, have 20 to 30 years left in their careers. I have 27 years left myself.
Who's counting?
Yeah, Benji, you and me both, we're looking forward to that full retirement time. So that's how it kind of impacts our overall economic fabric, is just recognizing it's showing a shift in our demographics, and that might shift our economy and what direction we're going in.
I mean, schools are an essential element of a quality of life here. Ashland has historically had an outstanding school district. They still have an outstanding school district, but it is a main characteristic that families look at when they're looking to relocate. So if we're wanting to bring business in that has families, we need a strong school district, and we want to maintain the families that we have here. So we have a good relationship with the school district that will continue. I don't envy what Dr. Hetrick and the school board have to kind of navigate right now. And part of our budget strategy and being so conservative and mindful about service level delivery and how we're using our revenue is to ensure that we are not in a similar situation a year or two from now where we're having to have more serious discussion about what we can do and or look for operating loans, etc. So yeah. So I need to go to a union negotiation. So I'm going to end class, but there is a request for a Chrome and Mill update. So we will put that on the agenda for next Wednesday class, if we can do that. Isabel, is that all right? Yeah. Okay, perfect. So we'll come prepared with that. In the meantime, open to feedback. If we're not hitting what you had hoped here, we'll get into our next topic on Wednesday. But thank you all for your time. Much appreciated. And have a great rest of your week. Enjoy the sunshine. All
Thank
right.
you all.
Bye, y'all.